Hi, it's Joe Morgan with the Tech Leaders Spotlight podcast, where we interview tech leaders to learn about their journey and leadership lessons learned along the way. This show is brought to you by the Tech Professional Money Operating System, where we help tech professionals who know they're doing well financially, but aren't certain if it's enough, or they just want to make sure that they're achieving the most they can with the finances they have. We help you invest cash wisely, make the most of stock awards, minimize your tax bill, and create clarity and confidence so you can spend less time thinking about your money and more time living the life that you want. If you'd like more information, look me up on LinkedIn. That's Joe Morgan at Best Financial Life. Today on our podcast, I'm very happy to have Bharath Mohan, who is a software engineer at Google and an experienced leader who specializes in privacy. Welcome to the podcast, Bharath.
Nice to be here.
So you specialize in privacy. So tell me, what does that mean to you?
Broadly speaking, what that means from a standpoint of, what I do at my job is working with compliance folks, working with product folks to understand what does a particular law or what does a particular initiative that an organization have mean for how they handle their technical data, how they handle their user flows, that kind of thing. But what it means to me personally is something that I've been interested in and passionate about ever since I was in high school, which is helping people get a better understanding of and control over their information, how they interact with this new, not really new anymore, but this technical world, this interconnected world that we all live in, making sure that what people put out there is what they want out there. I'm very passionate about that, and that's what it means to me, really.
That's something that's like hugely missing in the world today, right? Because nobody, I mean, well, I should just speak from my own perspective. I have no idea what's out there in terms of who I am, what my life is, what my health is, all of that stuff. And the more I use, AI tools, the more I wonder how much of that information is getting out there and in what form. I use, well, you're at Google, so I don't want to talk about Google specifically because
Sure.
we don't normally focus on, this isn't a corporate interview. But I've shied away from using some of Google's tools because I can't understand the privacy as it's written. I don't understand how it works. And it's not simple for me to understand, whereas some other specialized providers make it really simple for me to say, okay, this is shared, this is private, and all of that. And I work in a very highly regulated industry where it's a
Yeah.
big, it's not just my personal info, it's business info. So
Right, business
um,
info, client info. Yeah, it's definitely a very thorny and difficult thing to talk about. And I mean, even when you're in this professional space and you have trouble understanding it, it's harder even still for users who are just sort of trying to go about their lives, trying to get their email set up so that they can participate in the world. I mean, who can live without email anymore? And they just want things to be easy, and that's one of the things I try to work on making it easier both for the teams that build these products so that they can in turn make it easy for users to understand what the privacy implications are. But it's not an easy problem, definitely.
Yeah, no, not at all. But I think if you can crack that or get close to cracking that, there's a lot of value to provide the customer in terms of understanding where their data is, what data is out there, and how it's used. And there'll be a lot of appreciation for that. I think there's tons of value in doing that. So
Absolutely. And one of the reasons why I work at Google is, and I don't want to gas up my employer or put other people down, but I really do think that the high leadership at Google cares a lot about privacy in terms of making sure that users feel like their decisions are being respected and that they're able to access what they we have what's called the takeout program. I don't work directly on it and I don't want to speak too much about it, but one of the things that I hear a lot from other people who aren't at Google is they really like how full featured takeout it is and how it makes it easy for you to understand, okay, here's this information, here's how we got it, here's what products it's associated with, and here's how you can control that information. So that's one of the reasons why I love working at Google, is because we do take it very seriously and we do care a lot about it.
yeah, terrific. So thinking about your career in tech and your experience in tech, what does the word leadership mean to you when you think about it in the tech space?
Sure. Um, so I've primarily been, a technical person in my entire career. I haven't done a lot of team level leadership. So I'll talk about leadership primarily from what I've appreciated in the leaders that I've had and what I think has worked well. I think top on the list is communication. What's most important is always having a sense of where you stand respective to the broader team, the broader organization. What are the goals that are being pursued? How on track are we? When I say we, I mean the team, the org, whatever level of abstraction you want to work on is very important. And I think that the leaders I've appreciated the most are the ones where I've felt the most that we were on the same page regarding how's my performance, how's my team doing, what is coming down the pipeline in terms of things, what are problems that other partners have brought up or customers, clients have brought up. The more I'm in the know, at least as far as it relates to the work that I can contribute on, the better I've felt about things and the better that I've felt the team has done. And it's not a static thing. It comes and goes in waves. Sometimes it's easier to talk about these things, sometimes it's harder to talk about these things, but as long as I feel like the communication channels are open bidirectionally, that's sort of the thing that comes to me as top of mind for leadership is how good are they at communicating and being open.
Great. What else?
What else? I think that the other things that sort of come to mind are obviously sort of in the orbit of leadership, or sorry, in the orbit of communication. But the other thing is just being sort of clear in prioritization, I think, is important. Having a plan and understanding, okay, for this plan, here's X, Y, Z that we need to do, and here's the order of X, Y, Z in terms of importance. So, at my first job, I was at a company called Remeeting, and that company, what the offering was essentially transcription of meetings. Zoom meetings was our big one, but also we supported other meeting interfaces. And the idea was essentially you're having a conversation. You don't necessarily want to take notes. You want some kind of transcript that you can search after the fact, whether it's just the transcript itself or whatever shows up on screen. And one of the things that the founders there were extremely clear on was, hey, we don't want to roll our own video product. That's not our core competency. That's not important to what we do. We want to be a value add to Zoom, to Google Meet, to Jitsi, to whatever other these things are. And whether you agree with that decision or not, and I had my disagreements there, it was good to know, okay, we don't care about that. We're just going to integrate with it. That's a problem that we're not going to worry about. So I think that prioritization and communicating those priorities, of course, is extremely important for leadership. Picking a direction and being like, that's where we're going, and being clear about it. Obviously, I'm sure people have doubts in the background, but don't broadcast those doubts.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I want to dive into that a little bit more in terms of being clear in prioritization. So it makes a lot of sense when you talk about it in the positive aspect. Like, here's all the great reasons why it's good to be clear in prioritization. What happens when, or have you been in instances where there wasn't clarity of the prioritization? How does that affect the team and everything?
So when you say there isn't clarity in prioritization,
or have you had that experience? Maybe you haven't been in that position.
I have been in positions that seem right, but I'm trying to figure out like what are the nuances that are important, or maybe you just want me to answer based on what I think are important.
Yeah, of course.
Sure. Okay. There have been, business is not something that just, you pick a direction and you go. There's always going to be a fluidity and there's always going to be changing circumstances. And, what I think is important is, when there is a lack of clarity and prioritization, one of the things that I really respect about my current manager was, we had it's Google, it's a many-headed hydra, and we had a reorg, and it was like, okay, well, we have a reorg and we have new priorities that we need to focus on, but we need to figure out which of these are things that we can do, how we can do it. And it was as much a technical meeting as it was a sort of let's figure out priorities meeting. But what I really appreciated was we set aside some time where it was like, hey, unless it's something's on fire, this entire week, all we're talking about is ideas and priorities. What do we think is important as a team? And how can we implement those priorities? What solutions do we have for that? And I think that was a really good exercise because it got the entire team on the same page in terms of, okay, we don't actually know what the priorities. We don't have a clear top-down directive, and that's common in tech companies. They want things to be a little bit more bottom-up, especially after a reorg. So let's figure out, okay, what do we think we can prioritize well? What do we think is important from our perspective as, hey, we're handling this problem for this organization. What are the gaps that we see in terms of the existing solutions that we can solve? And that was very useful in terms of making sure, everybody was on the same page. Everybody understood, okay, here are the problems we see. Here are the problems we think we can solve easily. Here are the less low-hanging, so I guess higher-hanging fruit that will be more difficult to solve, but we think there's a plan to solve it. It just requires more coordination. And then here's the stuff that's like, okay, let's think about this 1 year, 2 year, 3 years down. Once we have a solution that people are using, we can tackle these harder problems. Getting everybody on the same page like that was, I think, very important, because it meant that when we did have to present to folks that were, higher up on the org chain, we could all be on the same page and say, hey, here's the plan. Here's why we picked this plan. Here are the trade-offs. Here's, our justification for why we think this is the important, and this is the roadmap that we've picked.
So you guys had to really invest some time and effort to get there, right?
Absolutely, yes. It was, like I said, it was a week where, and luckily we didn't have any major fires, so it was basically an entire week of just nonstop meetings where we booked out this large conference room and we were, putting Post-its on the wall and trying to figure out, okay, who would work on this? What's the, relative prioritization? What teams might need to be brought in to, in partnership on this, that kind of thing. So it was a dedicated time, and it ended up going a little bit over for some of the sort of like smaller pods that ended up needing to dive into the nitty gritty more. But it was a very useful time, because ever since then, we've just been able to execute. And this is like more than a year ago. Like, we've not had any major, like, oh, everything's on fire, we don't know what to do. We've just been sort of full steam ahead ever since.
Yeah, that organization is so important, especially when you work in a collaborative environment with so many smart people trying to work together and accomplish things. You've got to have the communication and the prioritization. Those are two good factors that I don't think we've heard talked about quite like that.
That's
So
good.
thank you.
Happy to
Yeah.
hear that I can bring something new to the podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate it. Now, the market, the job market itself is not so great. Hasn't been great for a while. As we all know, there's a lot of challenges out there. Given what's going on today in terms of layoffs, et cetera, what piece of advice would you recommend to create resiliency in the face of layoffs?
Resiliency in the face of layoffs. Well, so my career is a bit of an interesting. Well, it's not unique, but I consider it a little bit interesting. So I, graduated in 2018, and I was able to get a job right out of university. Thank you, Berkeley. And so, I'd already sort of settled into my career a little bit when the pandemic hit. And the interesting thing about tech is that it was in a bit of a roiling period at the start of the pandemic, where people, especially because I was at a startup, funding was sort of in question. The big companies were expanding significantly because there was a lot of demand for digital services, obviously. But the smaller companies, some of them were exploding and some of them were shuttering because everything was sort of up in the air. And, meaning we were in this weird place where theoretically our product was something that people would want, searchable transcription of conferencing services, that when everything's happening virtually over Zoom was exploding, obviously. That's the exact kind of thing. But it was also in this weird place where, because we weren't, like I said, offering the meeting services directly, we were just sort of a value add. We weren't seeing a lot of direct impact. So there was this weird position that we were in. And, one of the things that I took away from that was, one, obviously circumstances can always change. You can't be prepared for a black swan event, especially something like the pandemic. And so you just have to be nimble on your toes. And what being nimble on your toes means, and this is one of the reasons why I think communication is important. The founders were super open, like, hey, this is what we're doing. This is what we think is important. This is what we're prioritizing. And I was able to make the decision back then that, hey, it might work for them, it might not, but I don't think that I am on board with this plan. So I started looking for other options, and you have to be ready to sort of understand that sometimes the captain plots a course and you're either on board with that course or you have to find a port to get off at.
Yeah.
And so I sort of departed very early. No, like, it was just a difference in opinions, obviously, right? I don't want to think that or cast aspersions or anything like that.
Right, but what you did, what I hear you saying that you did was you were just really, really honest with yourself about how you felt, where you were, and where the company was going, and then you took that and you were honest with the people you worked with
Yeah.
too, and
Mhm.
brought that forward as well in I'm sure a respectful way, so that you could get to a good solution for everybody. Is that fair?
I think certainly that's my perspective, and I would hope that that's the perspective of everybody else involved, but I can't speak for them. Yeah, I think that there was definitely a moment where I was thinking, I don't think that this direction makes sense, certainly for the company and me in particular. So I'm going to look for other opportunities. And, I didn't come out and say that immediately the moment I made the decision, but once I was in the process and it seemed like things were going well, I did bring it up and be like, hey, look, I just want to be honest. I'm looking for other opportunities. There are a few that are pretty late in the pipeline. And then once things were finalized, I made sure that I wrapped up everything as professionally as I could. I mean, 2 weeks is standard, but I think I ended up taking 6 weeks just to make sure that everything was in a good place. And then I think everybody we left on good terms, certainly. So
Yeah.
yeah, I think that one of the learnings that I had from that was uh, in a market where things are uncertain, and uncertain is certainly the word I would use for the current job market, where depending on your level, you don't know whether you can get a job if you're fired, whether you're on the block. Uh, you know, it's rough out there. When you're in that position, it's always important to understand, okay, where is my team? Where is the org? Uh, are we getting work? Are we actively expanding? What's sort of the direction that we're looking at? And then am I on board with that direction?
Yeah.
Um, speaking of Google, one of the things that happened recently, like I mentioned, was a reorg within the I don't even know what term to use, the privacy org, and people got shuffled around, and our teams, I don't want to say mandate, but focus shifted a little bit, and a lot of people had to think, hey, do I like this shift? Am I well equipped for this shift? Or should I be looking for other teams, other opportunities? Some people left. I thought that I had the right tools for this new focus, and so I stayed. But it's one of those things where if you just sort of cruise and autopilot your way through your career, you're going to be left in this weird position where eventually you're going to be like, I'm not sure what I'm doing anymore.
Yeah, that statement right there, that's what's really coming through. And this may be something that may be somewhat second nature to you. Being a high achiever is that you're building towards something in your career, but not everybody, that doesn't come naturally for everybody to think that way necessarily. But especially at inflection points, it's super important to pay attention to that, put some effort into being honest with yourself and honest with your employer to the extent that it makes sense about what you really want and where you want to go, so that it takes you where because you only get to go through life once. You only get
Yeah,
to be in your 20s once. You only get to be in your 30s once. You
yeah,
want to do it not necessarily perfect, but you want to do it in a way where you end up in a place where you want to be.
yeah. No regrets, or minimize regrets. Obviously, no regrets is not going to happen for the
Impossible.
vast majority of people. But I think it's a very important thing you're touching on, and insofar as anything I can say that might help people figure out how to do that, it's I've always sort of had, so my first job was a back end software engineering position, but I've always had this idea in the back of my mind that what I want to work on is privacy, and it was when I was evaluating anything, it was always like, okay, how does this get me closer to being someone who works on privacy, someone who contributes to privacy, someone who understands the space, that kind of thing. So having that lodestone really helped, and that's not always going to be the case for everyone. People are in careers for whatever reason they're in, and it's not always going to be, hey, I'm super passionate about X in the space. Sometimes it's just, this is the space I'm in, and this is what I want
Yeah.
to make money doing, and I care more about my hobbies, and that's absolutely fine. But if you care more about your hobbies, you probably want to be in a position where you can afford to disconnect a little bit from work and spend more time on your hobbies. And you want to set yourself up to be in that kind of position. So, just figuring out, hey, what do I want to spend my time doing? What do I actually care about? is, I think, extremely helpful in terms of getting to that space of being honest with yourself and your employer and figuring out what the plan is. And I think people who are able to do that will have a lot easier time being honest in that way.
Yeah, I agree. Let's go to our personal finance question that we ask on the podcast. What's the most important financial decision you've made in your tech career, whether it's around compensation or positioning? Maybe it's exactly what you've been talking about, but what is the most important financial decision you've made?
I think easily the most important financial decision I made wasn't actually a financial decision at all, in the sense that it was, well, it wasn't just a financial decision. It was the first job I took out of college. I had a couple options, and there were two that were particularly enticing. One was a position in Northern Virginia, Washington, D.C. area, that was more of a government contractor position, and another was a startup. Compensation was relatively similar at both of these, so it ended up being a question of, where did I want to work and what kind of work did I want to do? And the interesting thing was, based on everything you've heard from me, a government contractor position, especially, this was like a cybersecurity contractor position, you might think, hey, that seems more like something related to privacy and, user protection and that kind of thing. You should have taken that job. And, honestly, that was my initial thought. Like, maybe I should take that job. But my thought was, well, okay, let's think about this in the long term. No shade on Virginia, but you can't beat the Bay Area for tech opportunities.
Right.
And ultimately, it came down to, I think that staying in the Bay Area would give me an easier time, longer term, sort of integrating into the tech privacy space specifically, rather than the contractor space. My life would have looked very differently if I'd moved to Northern Virginia, obviously. And I think that is easily the most influential decision I made, because I think I can say without a shadow of a doubt that had I joined that position out there, I would not be working at Google today. Very different position, very different path I would have taken.
Yeah, totally different. And
yeah,
I don't know, from what little I know of you and your personality, I think you made the right choice.
well, I mean, to the extent that my personality has been, I mean, we're talking about something that was, 7.5 years ago. To the extent that my personality has been influenced by that choice, certainly, yes, now it would look that way. Who knows what I would have seemed like back then,
Right.
and how I would have developed back then, right? It's hard to say, but easily the most influential choice I made, absolutely, yeah. And I
Yeah.
think that to the extent that it mattered, the courses I took in college definitely. I took an economics course, and one of my professors was extremely interested in the geography of jobs, and he loved to look at things like how the auto sector consolidated in Detroit, or how the tech sector is consolidated in California broadly and Silicon Valley specifically. And I think that that course really sort of influenced my thinking there, where it was like, okay, well, the geography of tech jobs is they're in the Bay Area, so I should really factor that in. I think that's easily the kind of thing that influences a lot of jobs. And in the wake of the pandemic, that's sort of diversified a little bit. There are other tech hubs, so I think it's definitely more defensible to say move to Texas, for example. Texas is a great scene nowadays with Oracle and sorry, blanked on the word, Tesla, and other companies setting up headquarters there. So certainly, there are more places you can be, but thinking with that kind of lens definitely helps, I think.
Yeah, and this is a different time than 2018 as well. So
Absolutely, yes, yeah, of
that's part of it too. Well, thanks so much for joining us, Bharath, today
course,
on the podcast.
yeah, absolutely, glad to be here.
Yeah, you brought a lot of energy and interesting things, and I think there's a lot of things for people to think about. So yeah, again, thanks for joining.
Of course.
Just as a reminder, this is sponsored by the Money Operating System, where tech leaders gain clarity and control of their finances so they can live out the rest of their life with intention. If you want to know more about us, look me up on LinkedIn, Joe Morgan at Best Financial Life.